You think the Emperor's palace is a throne of gold and glory. It's not. It's a tomb, and everyone inside it is already dead. They just don't know it yet. The deeper you go, the heavier it gets, pressing down on your mind until you forget your own name. So, what happens when you're born in a place where forgetting is the only mercy? I was born in a corridor that has no name. My father told me this when I was 6 years old, and his father told him the same, and so it has been for 27 generations of the Rain bloodline. We are Lumen Wardens, keepers of a single hallway that runs beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, a passage so deep and so forgotten that even the cartographers who once mapped these catacombs have long since turned to dust. The corridor is 300 meters long, lined with brass fixtures that hum with a frequency I feel in my teeth, and sealed at both ends by doors I have never seen opened. My family has maintained the lumen globes here since before the heresy, back when someone still cared whether the lights stayed on. Now we do it because we have always done it, and because there is nothing else. My name is Culdus Rain, and I am 31 years old, though time moves strangely here. I have lived my entire life within a 5-kilometer radius of the corridor, never ascending higher than sub-level 93, never seeing the sky, never touching anything that was not made of stone or metal or the worn fabric of a menial's robe. I have been told that above us, far above, there are halls of gold and marble where the Adeptus Custodes stand vigil, where the High Lords deliberate, where the machinery of the Imperium turns with the precision of a chronometer. I have been told that the Emperor himself sits enthroned at the summit of this place, a living god whose will sustains 1,000,000 worlds. I have been told many things, but I have seen none of them. What I have seen is this: the same 300 meters of stone, the same brass fixtures that corrode no matter how often I polish them, the same flickering lumen globes that burn out every 6 weeks and must be replaced by hand. I have seen my father's hands shake as he grew older, his fingers too weak to grip the wrench, and I have seen my younger brother, Ven, take up the work when I could not be in 2 places at once. I have seen the way our mother stopped speaking in her final years, her eyes fixed on the far door as though she expected it to open, though it never did. I have also felt the pressure. It is always there, a weight against the inside of my skull, a sensation like standing too close to a fire you cannot see. It grows stronger at certain hours, though there are no chronometers here, and we measure time only by the rhythm of our work. When the pressure swells, the air itself seems to thicken, and the brass fixtures hum louder, and the lumen globes flicker in patterns that almost seem deliberate. My father used to say it was the blessing of the Emperor, that we were so close to his divinity that we could feel the edges of his will. He said it with reverence, but I remember the way his hands trembled when he said it, the way he would not meet my eyes. My mother never spoke of it at all, but I would catch her staring at the walls, her lips moving in silent prayer, her face grey with exhaustion. Ven, who is 24 and has known nothing but this corridor, does not seem to notice the pressure anymore. He moves through his duties with the blank efficiency of a servitor, his expression empty, his thoughts, if he has any, hidden behind a mask of practiced indifference. I used to think we were alone down here, my family and the corridor and the work. I was wrong. There are others, thousands of them, perhaps millions, spread throughout the sub-levels of the palace in a vast honeycomb of sealed chambers and forgotten halls. I know this because I have heard their footsteps, faint and distant, echoing through ventilation shafts that carry sound from places I will never reach. I know this because once, when I was 16, a door at the far end of our corridor opened for the first time in my life, and a procurator in red robes emerged, flanked by 2 servitors whose eyes had been replaced with brass lenses. The procurator did not speak to us. He inspected the lumen globes with a handheld auspex, made notations on a data slate, and then departed, sealing the door behind him. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 minutes, but I remember the way he looked at us, or rather, the way he did not look at us. His gaze passed over us as though we were part of the architecture, no more worthy of attention than the brass fixtures or the stone floor. When he was gone, My father knelt and prayed for an hour, thanking the Emperor for the honor of being seen by one of his servants. I did not pray. I stood in the corridor and stared at the door and wondered what lay on the other side. That was 15 years ago, and the door has not opened since. The work is simple, which is to say it is endless. Each lumen globe must be cleaned every 3 days to prevent the accumulation of ash, which falls from the ceiling in a fine black powder that coats everything. The brass fixtures must be polished weekly to slow the corrosion, though it never stops entirely. The stone floor must be swept twice daily, and the ventilation grates must be cleared of debris once per month, a task that requires crawling into narrow shafts where the pressure is so intense that it feels like drowning. Every 6 weeks, one or more of the lumen globes will burn out, and it must be replaced within 24 hours, or the corridor will fall into darkness, which is forbidden. The replacements are stored in a locked cabinet at the midpoint of the corridor, and the key hangs on a chain around my neck, as it hung around my father's neck and his father's before him. There are 47 globes in the cabinet, enough for 6 years of replacements, if none are damaged. After that, I do not know what we are supposed to do. My father said that a procurator would come with more when the supply ran low, but I have never seen this happen, and the cabinet has never been restocked in my lifetime. I do not think about this often, but when I do, the pressure seems to grow heavier, and I have to stop working and sit against the wall until it passes. Ven does not talk much anymore. He performs his tasks with mechanical precision, his movements so practiced that he can clean a lumen globe or polish a fixture without seeming to think about it. He eats his rations in silence, sleeps for exactly 6 hours each rest cycle, and wakes without complaint to begin again. I have tried to speak with him, to ask him what he thinks about, whether he dreams, whether he ever wonders what lies beyond the doors, but he only stares at me with eyes that are as empty as the corridor itself. Once, I asked him if he remembered our mother, and he said yes, but when I asked what he remembered, he could not answer. He stood there with his mouth open, his brow furrowed, as though reaching for something that was no longer there, and then he turned away and resumed his work. I did not ask again. I think the pressure is taking him, the way it took our mother, the way it will eventually take me. There is no clock here, but I have learned to measure time by the rhythm of the work, by the cycles of sleep and waking, by the slow accumulation of ash on the floor. I estimate that I have lived approximately 11,000 days, though I cannot be certain. Some days feel longer than others, as though time itself has been stretched thin, and some days pass in a blur, as though I have lost hours without noticing. The pressure makes it difficult to hold on to thoughts, to remember things that happened more than a few days ago. I keep a journal, written in the margins of old maintenance logs that my father left behind. But when I read my own words, they often feel like they were written by someone else. There are entries I do not remember writing, accounts of events I do not recall, and sometimes entire pages have been torn out, though I do not know who did it. Perhaps I did, perhaps I forgot. The doors are not locked, but they are sealed. I know this because I have tried to open them late in the rest cycle when Ven is asleep and the corridor is as quiet as it ever gets. The door at the eastern end is made of iron, 3 meters tall and half a meter thick, with no visible handle or hinges. It is perfectly smooth, as though it was cast in a single piece, and when I press my hands against it, I feel nothing, not even the faint vibration of machinery. The door at the western end is different. It is made of stone, or something that resembles stone, and it is warm to the touch, as though there is a fire burning on the other side. There are symbols carved into its surface, angular and precise, and when I look at them for too long, the pressure surges and I have to turn away. I do not know what the symbols mean, and I do not ask because I am not certain I want to know. My father once told me that the western door leads to the inner sanctum, to the places where the Custodes walk, and that to pass through it would be to die instantly, consumed by the radiance of the Emperor's will. He said this as a warning, but I think it was also a comfort, the idea that there was something beyond the corridor, even if we could never reach it. I wonder, sometimes, if he believed it. The ash is a constant presence, falling from the ceiling in a slow, steady drift that never stops. It is fine and black, like powdered charcoal, and it coats the floor and the brass fixtures and the lumen globes with a layer that thickens over the course of days. I do not know where it comes from. The ceiling is solid stone, unbroken and unmarked, and there are no vents or openings that would allow ash to fall through, and yet it does, endlessly, as though the corridor itself is slowly disintegrating. When I sweep it into piles and dispose of it in the waste chute at the midpoint of the corridor, I notice that it is warm, almost uncomfortably so, and that it has a faint smell, acrid and sharp, like burnt hair or scorched metal. Ven does not seem to notice the smell, or if he does not care. He sweeps the ash without complaint, without curiosity, without any sign that he has ever questioned why it exists. I envy him, sometimes, his ability to simply do the work without thinking about it, to move through the corridor as though it is the only thing that has ever existed or ever will. But I cannot stop thinking. I think about the other workers, the ones I have never seen but whose presence I can feel through the walls and the floors and the ventilation shafts. I think about the procurator who came 15 years ago, and whether he is still alive, and whether he remembers us. I think about the emperor, enthroned somewhere far above, and whether he knows that we exist, whether he cares, whether our work has any meaning beyond the simple fact that we do it. I think about the pressure, the weight that presses against my skull and makes it hard to remember, hard to feel, hard to care. I think about what will happen when the lumen globes run out, when the cabinet is empty and the corridor falls into darkness. I think about these things, and the more I think, the heavier the pressure becomes, until I have to stop and sit against the wall and wait for it to pass. Ven found me sitting there once during what should have been a work period, and he asked me if I was ill. I told him no, I was only tired. He nodded and returned to his work, and I sat there for another hour, staring at the brass fixtures and trying to remember what it felt like to want something, anything, beyond the corridor and the work and the endless accumulation of ash. I do not remember when I stopped wanting things. The rations arrive once per month, delivered through a chute at the eastern end of the corridor that opens for exactly 30 seconds and then seals again. The rations are grey blocks of compressed protein and carbohydrate wrapped in foil and stamped with the aquila. They have no flavor, no texture, nothing to distinguish one from another, and they provide exactly enough nutrition to sustain life without pleasure or discomfort. My father used to say a prayer before each meal, thanking the emperor for his generosity, but I have not prayed in years. I eat the rations because I must, and because without them I would die, and death is not permitted. Death would mean abandoning the work, and the work must continue, has always continued, will always continue, long after I am gone and forgotten. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I simply stopped eating, if I let myself waste away until I could no longer stand, until the work was left undone and the lumen globes burned out and the corridor fell into darkness. Would someone come to replace me? Would the door open and a new menial be sent in, another generation of reigns to continue the cycle? Or would the corridor simply be sealed, forgotten, left to rot in the darkness like so many others? I do not test this hypothesis, because I am afraid of the answer. The pressure is worst at night, or what I have come to think of as night, the period when Ven and I sleep in the small chamber adjacent to the corridor. The chamber is barely large enough for 2 cots and a footlocker, and the walls are bare stone, unadorned except for a small bronze plaque that reads Rhine Family Quarters in High Gothic script. The plaque is so old that the letters are almost worn away, and I wonder who put it there and why they thought it was necessary. The chamber has no door, only an archway that opens directly onto the corridor, and so the pressure follows us even here, pressing down on us as we sleep, filling our dreams with images I cannot quite remember when I wake. I dream of fire, of vast spaces filled with light and heat, of figures that are too large to be human, standing over me with eyes that burn like stars. I dream of the emperor, though I have never seen him, and in my dreams he is not a man but a presence a weight that crushes everything beneath it, a silence so profound that it drowns out all thought. When I wake, I am covered in sweat, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, and the pressure is so intense that I cannot move for several minutes. Ven sleeps through it all, his face peaceful, his breathing steady, and I wonder if he dreams at all, or if the pressure has taken even that from him. I have begun to suspect that the pressure is not a byproduct of the Emperor's presence, but a tool, a means of control. I think it is designed to strip away memory, emotion, individuality, to reduce us to nothing more than hands that perform the work, bodies that move through the corridor without thought or question. I think it is why my mother stopped speaking, why Ven has become so empty, why I find it harder and harder to hold on to who I am. I think the pressure is consuming us, slowly, one thought at a time, until there is nothing left but the work. I do not share this suspicion with Ven, because I do not think he would understand, and because I am not certain I want to burden him with it. The ventilation shafts are narrow and dark, accessible only through grates set into the floor at irregular intervals along the corridor. Once per month, it is my responsibility to crawl into these shafts and clear them of debris, which accumulates in clumps of ash and dust and unidentifiable fragments that might once have been organic. The shafts are barely wide enough for my shoulders, and the air inside is hot and stale, thick with the smell of burnt metal and something else, something sweeter and more unpleasant that I try not to think about. The pressure is always stronger inside the shafts, so intense that it feels like my skull is being compressed, and I have to move quickly, working by feel in the darkness, because I cannot bring a lumen globe with me and still fit through the narrow passages. I have learned to navigate the shafts by memory, by the texture of the walls and the sound of my own breathing, and I have learned to ignore the faint noises that come from deeper within the ventilation system, noises that sound almost like voices, though I know they cannot be. Once, while clearing a shaft near the western end of the corridor, I found something that should not have been there. It was a small object, smooth and metallic, about the size of my thumb, and it was warm to the touch, pulsing with a faint rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. I held it in the darkness, feeling the pulse against my palm, and for a moment the pressure eased, and I could think clearly, could remember things I had forgotten, could feel something that might have been curiosity or fear or wonder. Then the object grew hotter, almost unbearably so, and I dropped it, and it clattered away into the darkness, lost in the depths of the shaft. When I emerged back into the corridor, the pressure returned in full force, and I could not remember what I had been thinking about, only that I had found something and lost it again. I did not tell Ven about the object, and I did not go looking for it again. There are no other people in the corridor, but there are signs of them, evidence that we are not alone in the sub-levels of the palace. Sometimes, late in the rest cycle, I hear footsteps echoing through the ventilation shafts, faint and distant, as though someone is walking in a parallel corridor just beyond the walls. Sometimes I hear voices, low and indistinct, too muffled to make out words, but unmistakably human. Sometimes I hear machinery, the grinding of gears and the hiss of hydraulics, and I imagine vast engines turning in chambers I will never see, servitors performing tasks I cannot comprehend, procurators marking their data slates with inscrutable notations. Sometimes I hear nothing at all, a silence so complete that it feels like the entire palace has stopped breathing, and the pressure surges until I have to sit down and wait for the world to start moving again. I have tried to communicate with these other people, whoever they are. I have knocked on the walls, tapped out rhythms on the brass fixtures, called out into the ventilation shafts, hoping for some response, some acknowledgement that we are not the only ones here. But there is never an answer, only the echo of my own voice, fading into the darkness, and the pressure, growing heavier as though to punish me for the attempt. Ven does not hear the footsteps, or the voices, or the machinery. When I ask him if he has noticed anything unusual, he looks at me with those empty eyes and says no, everything is as it should be. I do not press the issue because I am not certain he is wrong, because perhaps the footsteps and the voices are not real, are only phantoms conjured by the pressure, by the slow erosion of my mind, but I think they are real, and I think we are not alone, and I think whatever is happening in the other corridors, in the other chambers, is the same thing that is happening to us. One day, without warning, the door at the eastern end of the corridor opened. It was not a rest cycle, not a delivery time, not any hour I recognized as significant, but the iron door simply split down the middle with a grinding sound that echoed through the corridor like thunder, and a procurator stepped through. He was not the same procurator I had seen 15 years ago. This one was younger, or at least less worn, his red robes crisp and clean, his face pale and unmarked. He was accompanied by a single servitor, a hunched figure with augmetic limbs and a faceplate that hid whatever remained of its humanity. The procurator carried a data slate and an auspex, and he moved through the corridor with the brisk efficiency of someone performing a routine inspection. He did not speak to us, did not acknowledge our presence in any way, but I felt his gaze on me, cold and appraising, as though he were measuring me against some invisible standard. He stopped at the cabinet where the lumen globes are stored, opened it with a key I had never seen, and counted the remaining globes. Then he made a notation on his data slate and closed the cabinet again. He moved to the western door, scanned it with the auspex, and made another notation. Then he turned to leave, and I did something I had never done before. I spoke to him. I asked him where the globes came from, whether more would be delivered when the cabinet was empty. I asked him what lay beyond the doors, what purpose the corridor served, why we were here. I asked him if he knew my name, if he knew anything about the Rain family, if he had any record of the 27 generations that had come before me. He did not answer. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he raised the data slate and made another notation. The servitor behind him shifted, its augmetic limbs whirring softly, and I realized with a cold certainty that if I spoke again, if I pressed the issue, the servitor would be instructed to act. I did not know what form that action would take, but I knew it would not be pleasant. So I fell silent, and the procurator left, and the door sealed behind him with the same grinding sound. And I stood there in the corridor, trembling, feeling the pressure surge and press against my skull until I thought it would crack. Ven said nothing, but that night, as we lay on our cots in the small chamber, he reached over and touched my hand. Just once, a brief contact that lasted only a second. It was the first time he had touched me in years, the first time he had shown any sign that he was still present, still capable of connection. I wanted to say something, to tell him I was sorry, to tell him I was afraid. But the words would not come, and so we lay there in silence, the pressure pressing down on us both, until sleep finally came. The next morning, Ven did not remember touching my hand, and when I asked him about it, he looked at me with confusion and said he had done no such thing. I did not argue. I returned to the work, and so did he, and the corridor continued as it always had, the lumen globes flickering, the ash falling, the pressure pressing down. But something had changed. I could not name it, could not define it, but I felt it in the air, a subtle shift in the rhythm of the corridor, as though the palace itself had taken notice of me. I think that was the moment I realized the truth. Or at least, the beginning of the truth. The realization did not come all at once, but in fragments, scattered thoughts that I pieced together over the following weeks and months. I realized that the corridor was not a place of importance, not a vital artery in the machinery of the Imperium, but a dead end, a sealed space designed to be forgotten. I realized that the work we did, the cleaning and polishing and replacement of lumen globes, had no purpose beyond the work itself, that no one was coming to inspect our efforts, that no one cared whether the corridor was maintained or not. I realized that the pressure was not a blessing, not the radiance of the Emperor's will, but a weight, a burden, a force designed to crush us into submission, to strip away everything that made us human until we were nothing but obedient tools. And I realized that we were not alone in this. The footsteps I heard, the voices, the machinery, they were all signs of the same thing. A vast network of sealed corridors and forgotten chambers spread throughout the sub-levels of the palace, each one inhabited by menials like us, families like ours, performing tasks that had no meaning, living lives that had no purpose, existing only to absorb the pressure, to bear the weight, to be consumed by the God who sat enthroned far above. I think the palace is not a seat of power, but a containment structure, a prison designed to hold something so vast and so terrible that it must be fed constantly, must be given souls to consume, lives to burn, minds to break. I think the Emperor is not a god in the way I was taught, not a benevolent protector, but a force, a presence, a hunger that devours everything around it, and we, the menials, the forgotten, the nameless, are the fuel that keeps it burning. I do not know if this is true. I have no evidence, no proof, only the fragments of thought that I have managed to hold on to despite the pressure, despite the weight that presses down on me every moment of every day. But I believe it, because it is the only explanation that makes sense, the only explanation that accounts for the corridor and the doors and the ash and the pressure and the emptiness in Ven's eyes. I believe it, and I am terrified because there is nothing I can do about it. The work continues. The lumen globes burn out, and I replace them. The ash falls, and I sweep it. The brass fixtures corrode, and I polish them. Ven moves through his tasks with mechanical precision, his face blank, his thoughts, if he has any, buried beneath the weight of the pressure. I try to hold on to myself, to remember who I am, to resist the slow erosion of my mind, but it is so hard, so exhausting, and I feel myself slipping, day by day, thought by thought, until I am not certain there will be anything left of me to resist. Sometimes I wonder if my father knew. I wonder if he understood what the corridor truly was, what we truly were, and if he kept that knowledge from me out of mercy or cowardice. I wonder if the prayers he offered were genuine expressions of faith, or simply a way to make the work bearable, a lie he told himself so that he could continue, day after day, until the pressure finally took him. I wonder if my mother's silence was a refusal to speak the truth, or simply the result of the truth having already consumed her. I wonder if Ven is happier now, in his emptiness, than I am in my understanding. I do not have answers to these questions, and I do not think I ever will. The procurator has not returned since that day, and the door has remained sealed. The cabinet of lumen globes is down to 31, which means I have approximately 4 years before they run out. I do not know what will happen then. I do not know if the procurator will come with more, or if the corridor will simply be left to fall into darkness, another sealed chamber in the vast honeycomb of the palace, another forgotten space inhabited by forgotten people. I think about this often, more often than I should, and the pressure grows heavier each time I do, as though to punish me for daring to think beyond the work. But I cannot stop thinking, because thinking is all I have left, the only thing that separates me from Ven, the only thing that proves I am still human. I have started to notice patterns in the ash, in the way it falls and accumulates on the floor. The patterns are not random, not chaotic, but deliberate, almost geometric, as though something is arranging the ash into shapes. I do not know what the shapes mean, but I have begun to sketch them in the margins of my journal, copying them as precisely as I can before I sweep the ash away. Some of the shapes resemble the symbols carved into the western door, angular and precise, and when I look at them for too long, the pressure surges and I have to turn away. Other shapes are more abstract, spirals and circles and lines that intersect in ways that seem significant but which I cannot interpret. I have tried to show the shapes to Ven to see if he notices them too, but he looks at my sketches with no recognition, no interest, and when I point to the ash on the floor, he sees only ash, only the debris that must be swept away. I think the ash is a message, or a warning, or a record of something that is happening far above, in the places we cannot see. I think the shapes are being written by the pressure itself, or by whatever creates the pressure, and I think they are meant for someone, though I do not know who, and I do not know why. I have also noticed that the pressure is growing stronger. It is a subtle change, barely perceptible from day to day, but over the course of weeks and months, I can feel the difference. What was once a weight against my skull has become a crushing force, and there are times when I cannot stand, cannot think, cannot do anything but lie on my cot and wait for the surge to pass. Ven does not seem to notice the change, or if he does not react to it. He continues his work without complaint, without pause, and I wonder if the pressure has already consumed him, if there is nothing left inside him but the work. I am afraid that I will become like him, that one day I will wake up and the thoughts will be gone, the questions will be gone, and I will move through the corridor with the same blank efficiency, the same empty eyes, the same absence of self. I am afraid of this, and yet there is a part of me that longs for it, that craves the oblivion, the release from the constant weight of understanding. It would be easier, I think, to simply let go, to stop fighting, to allow the pressure to take me. But I am not ready yet, and so I continue. One night, as I lay on my cot, unable to sleep because of the pressure, I heard a sound that I had never heard before. It was a low, resonant hum, like the vibration of a vast machine, and it seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the stone and the brass and the air. The hum was not loud, but it was pervasive, filling the corridor and the chamber with a vibration that I could feel in my bones. It lasted for several minutes, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic pattern, and then it stopped as suddenly as it had begun. When it was gone, the silence that followed was so profound that it felt like the palace had died, like everything had stopped. And I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The silence continued, the pressure remained, and the corridor was as it had always been. But I could not shake the feeling that something had changed, that the hum had been a signal, a warning, a message from the depths of the palace that I was not equipped to understand. Ven did not wake during the hum, and in the morning, when I asked him if he had heard anything unusual, he said no. The night had been quiet. I did not argue, but I made a note in my journal, recording the hum and the time at which it had occurred, and I have been waiting ever since for it to happen again. It has not, but I think it will, and when it does, I will be listening. The western door has begun to glow. It is a faint glow, barely visible in the light of the lumen globes, but it is there, a pale luminescence that emanates from the symbols carved into the stone. The glow is not constant but pulses slowly, in rhythm with the pressure, and when I stand close to the door, I can feel heat radiating from it, a dry, searing heat that makes my skin prickle. I have not told Ven about the glow, because I do not think he would see it, or if he did, I do not think he would care. But I see it, and I feel it, and I know that something is happening on the other side of the door, something vast and terrible, and that the door is all that stands between us and whatever it is. I think the door is weakening, or perhaps the thing on the other side is growing stronger. I think the pressure is building towards something. A threshold that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. I think the palace is not a static structure but a living thing, or a dying thing, and that we are trapped inside it, small and insignificant, waiting for the end. I have begun to test the limits of the corridor, to see how far I can stray from the work without consequences. I have skipped cleaning cycles, left the ash to accumulate for days at a time, allowed the brass fixtures to corrode without polishing them. I have done this deliberately, as an experiment, to see if anyone will notice, if the procurator will return, if the doors will open and some punishment will be delivered. But nothing happens. The ash continues to fall, the pressure continues to press, and the corridor remains as it has always been, indifferent to my rebellion, indifferent to my existence. This indifference is more terrifying than any punishment could be, because it confirms what I have already suspected, that we do not matter, that the work does not matter, that we could stop entirely and no one would care, no one would notice, no one would come to replace us. We are here to absorb the pressure, to bear the weight, and whether we perform the work or not is irrelevant, because the work is not the point. The point is our presence, our suffering, our slow consumption by the force that sits enthroned above. I have stopped performing the work entirely. Ven continues, moving through his tasks with the same mechanical precision, but I sit against the wall and watch him, and I think about the doors, and the ash, and the pressure, and the glow that pulses from the western door. I think about the 27 generations of Rains who came before me, who lived and died in this corridor, who believed they were serving the Emperor, who believed their work had meaning. I think about my father, kneeling in prayer, his hands trembling, his eyes fixed on the floor. I think about my mother, silent and grey, staring at the far door as though expecting it to open. I think about Ven, empty and efficient, no longer a person but a tool, a body that moves through the corridor because it knows nothing else. And I think about myself, Caldus Rain, 31 years old, a Lumen Warden, a menial, a forgotten soul in a forgotten corridor. And I wonder if I have any choice left, if there is any path forward that does not end in consumption, in erasure, in the complete and total dissolution of self. I do not think there is, and so I sit against the wall, and I wait. The pressure has become unbearable. It is no longer a weight but a crushing force, a presence that fills every moment, every breath, every thought. I can barely stand, barely move, barely think through the constant roar of it, a noise that is not a noise, a sensation that is not a sensation, but something beyond words, beyond comprehension. I think it is the Emperor, or what the Emperor has become, a vast and terrible hunger that consumes everything, that devours worlds and souls, and minds without pause, without mercy, without awareness. I think he does not know we are here, does not care, cannot afford to notice us, because if he did, the weight of his attention would annihilate us instantly. I think we are being consumed, slowly, one moment at a time, and that this consumption is the only purpose we have ever had. Ven has stopped moving. He stands in the corridor, motionless, his eyes fixed on the western door, his face blank. He has been standing there for what I estimate to be 6 hours, and he has not responded to my voice, has not reacted when I touched his shoulder, has not blinked or breathed or given any sign that he is still present. I think the pressure has taken him completely, finally, and that what remains is only a shell, a body that will stand there until it collapses, until it is swept away with the ash and the debris and the forgotten remnants of all the other menials who have stood in corridors like this, in chambers like this, in the vast and terrible depths of the palace. I am next. I know this, and I accept it, because there is nothing else I can do. The pressure is too strong, the weight too great, and I am so tired, so very tired, of fighting, of thinking, of holding on to the fragments of myself that are already slipping away. I can feel myself dissolving, piece by piece, memory by memory, until soon there will be nothing left but the work, and then not even that, just silence, just emptiness, just the corridor and the ash and the pressure. But before I go, before I lose myself completely, I will write this down, will record what I have seen and felt and understood, so that if anyone ever finds this journal, if anyone ever reads these words, they will know the truth. They will know that the palace is not a place of power but a prison, a containment structure, a vast machine designed to absorb and contain and consume. They will know that the Emperor is not a god but a force, a hunger, a weight so vast that it requires millions of souls to bear it, to be crushed beneath it, to be burned as fuel for a fire that will never go out. They will know that we, the menials, the forgotten, the nameless, are not servants but victims, sacrifices offered to a god who cannot afford to notice us, who will consume us without awareness, without mercy, without end. They will know, and perhaps, if they are wiser than I am, they will find a way to escape, to resist, to refuse the work and the corridor and the pressure. But I do not think they will, because I think the palace is too vast, the pressure too strong, the weight too great. I think everyone who enters the palace is already lost, already consumed, already dissolved into the vast and terrible machine that sustains the Imperium. I think we are all fuel for a fire that burns without light, without warmth, without hope. The glow from the western door has grown brighter, and the symbols carved into the stone are now clearly visible, pulsing in rhythm with the pressure. I can see them from where I sit, and I can feel them pulling at me, drawing me forward, as though they want me to approach, to touch the door, to pass through it into whatever lies beyond. I do not want to go. I am afraid of what I will find on the other side, afraid of the heat and the light and the presence that I know is waiting there. But I also cannot stay here, cannot sit against this wall forever, cannot watch Ven standing motionless in the corridor, cannot wait for the pressure to take me the way it has taken him. So I stand, slowly, painfully, and I walk toward the western door. Each step is an effort, a battle against the pressure that presses down on me, that tries to crush me into the floor, but I continue, because there is nothing else left to do. I reach the door, and I place my hand against the stone, and it is hot, so hot that it burns, but I do not pull away. I can feel the symbols beneath my palm, vibrating, pulsing, alive with a force that is beyond my understanding, and I can feel the presence on the other side, vast and terrible and all-consuming. I think about pushing the door open, about stepping through and facing whatever is on the other side, but I know I cannot. The door is not meant to be opened, not by someone like me, not by a menial, a lumen warden, a forgotten soul in a forgotten corridor. The door is a barrier, a seal, a final protection against the thing that lies beyond, and if I open it, I will be consumed instantly, burned to ash by the radiance of the Emperor's will, or whatever it is that has taken his place. So I stand there, my hand against the door, feeling the heat, feeling the pressure, and I understand, finally, what my life has been. I understand that I was never meant to serve, never meant to ascend, never meant to reach the inner sanctum or stand in the presence of the Emperor. I was meant to be here, in this corridor, bearing the weight, absorbing the pressure, existing only as a buffer between the God who sits enthroned above and the rest of humanity. I was meant to be consumed, slowly, anonymously, without notice, without recognition, without meaning. And I have been. I remove my hand from the door, and I turn away, and I walk back to the wall where I have been sitting. I sit down, and I pick up my journal, and I write these final words, knowing that they will be the last I ever write, knowing that the pressure is growing stronger, knowing that soon I will be like Ven, standing motionless in the corridor, a body without a mind, a tool without purpose, a soul that has been consumed by the fire that burns at the heart of the palace. I think about the Emperor, and I wonder if he knows that we are here, if he cares, if he has any awareness of the millions of menials like me scattered throughout the sublevels, bearing the weight of his existence. I do not think he does. I think he is too vast, too terrible, too consumed by the burden of sustaining the Imperium to notice the small and insignificant lives that are sacrificed to keep him burning. I think we are nothing to him, less than nothing, just fuel, just ash, just debris to be swept away and forgotten. And I think that is the truth of life in the Emperor's palace, the truth that no one speaks, the truth that is buried beneath layers of ritual and dogma and faith. We are not here to serve, we are not here to ascend. We are here to be consumed, and that consumption is slow and anonymous and total, and when we are gone, there will be no record of our existence, no memory of our sacrifice, nothing but the corridor and the ash and the next generation of menials who will come to take our place. I am Culdus Rain, 31 years old, a lumen warden, a menial, a forgotten soul in a forgotten corridor. I was born in a place that has no name, and I will die in a place that has no name, and no one will remember me, and no one will care. This is my life. This is my purpose. This is what it means to live inside the Emperor's palace. And now, as the pressure grows heavier, as the glow from the western door grows brighter, as the ash continues to fall, and the lumen globes flicker and fade, I feel myself slipping away, thought by thought, memory by memory, until there is nothing left but silence. Ven is still standing in the corridor, motionless, his eyes fixed on the door. I wonder if he can still see, still hear, still feel anything at all, or if he is already gone, already consumed, already part of the ash that falls endlessly from the ceiling. I wonder if I will join him soon, if we will stand together in the corridor, two empty bodies, two forgotten souls, waiting for the end. I do not think it will be long now. The pressure is everything. It is the air and the stone and the light. It is the corridor and the work and the ash. It is the past and the future and the endless, crushing present. It is the Emperor, or what the Emperor has become, a weight so vast that it must be borne by millions, a hunger so great that it must be fed constantly, a presence so terrible that it cannot afford to notice the small and insignificant lives that sustain it. I am being consumed, and I cannot resist, and I do not want to resist anymore, because resistance is exhausting and futile and pointless. I am tired, so tired, and the pressure is so heavy, and I just want it to stop, just want the weight to lift, just want to rest. But there is no rest here, not in the Emperor's palace, not in the corridors and chambers and sealed spaces that honeycomb the depths of this vast and terrible structure. There is only the work, and the pressure, and the slow, inevitable consumption of all who enter. I think this is the final truth, the one that cannot be spoken, the one that must be buried beneath layers of faith and ritual and dogma. The palace is not a place of power, but a machine, a vast and terrible machine designed to contain and sustain and consume, and we are not servants but fuel, burned endlessly to keep the fire burning, to keep the Imperium alive, to keep the Emperor enthroned. We are nothing, and we have always been nothing, and we will always be nothing. And that is the price of survival in a galaxy that has no mercy, no kindness, no hope. I close my journal, and I set it aside, and I close my eyes, and I wait for the pressure to take me, to consume me, to dissolve me into the ash that falls endlessly from the ceiling. I wait for the end, knowing that it will come, knowing that it is already here, knowing that I have been dying since the moment I was born, slowly, anonymously, without meaning. This is my life. This is my death. This is what it means to live inside the Emperor's palace. The glow from the western door is blinding now, filling the corridor with light, and I can hear the hum again, the low, resonant vibration that seems to come from the walls, from the stone, from the very bones of the palace itself. The hum grows louder, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic pattern, and I feel the pressure surge, stronger than it has ever been, crushing down on me with a force that is beyond endurance. I open my eyes, and I see Ven, still standing in the corridor, his body silhouetted against the glow. He does not move, does not react, and I realize that he is gone, completely, finally, consumed by the pressure, by the weight, by the fire that burns at the heart of the palace. And I am next. I feel my thoughts slipping away, one by one, memories dissolving like ash in water, and I try to hold on to something, anything, some fragment of who I am, but there is nothing left, nothing but the corridor and the work and the pressure. I am Custodes Rain. I am a lumen warden. I am nothing. The light grows brighter, the hum grows louder, and I feel myself dissolving, piece by piece, thought by thought, until there is nothing left but the work, and then not even that, just silence, just emptiness, just the corridor and the ash and the pressure. I am consumed. I am forgotten. I am gone. And the corridor remains, as it has always remained, as it will always remain, waiting for the next generation of menials, the next forgotten souls, the next sacrifices to be offered to the God who sits enthroned far above, who cannot afford to notice them, who will consume them without awareness, without mercy, without end. This is life inside the Emperor's palace. This is the truth. This is all there is.